Thank you, Chris. Up next, we have Clemens from our very own ByWater Solutions and Tomas Cohen from Theke Solutions, speaking about pluggability and extensibility. Let's give them a round of applause.
So we're here to talk about the Cohen plugin system a little bit, just where it stands now, and then I'm going to give you that intro, and then Tomas is going to talk about the exciting that he's doing. And when I start to get wrong, he's just going to push me out of the way violently and take them off. So the Cohen plugin system has been around since 2013. It was written at ByWater by Kyle back there. You can follow the bug there if you want information about that. There is a wiki page when using it, but the simple fact of it is it allows users to download a KPZ file to add new functionality to Cohen or extend Cohen functionality. There's a few out there that you may be familiar with that some of you are using. I know Ed is using our Biblioteca plugin. Coverflow is used by many of our partners and other sites. The EDS plugin, which you can talk to David Podboy in the back there, if you're interested in that. EDI and Gobi are both plugins. Gobi is directly its own stand, and EDI, Kyle has made all of the extensions to EDI pluggable so that depending on your vendor, you might be using one of these plugins and not even know you're using plugins. Hourly Loan, Reports Plus, CSV Part. Those are just some examples. So we found that plugins are a really useful tool for development for a lot of reasons. One, if you have a vendor who has a unique need for the system, they need information that we might not need for any other reason, and you can't really get it to other libraries. So EDS uses the plugin. Biblioteca, the integration was unique. It's a good workflow too. It lets us move from having a spec to testing to revising and streamlining. It's a nice way to kind of move things along, especially if you don't quite know where you are when you start. For things that are going to be one-time tasks that maybe not every library is going to need, but certain institutions need. Before I started working at ByWater, my library, we had to re-barcode all of our books. So I wrote a very basic plugin that kind of went through and just let us do that really quickly. It's also good for prototyping new features, which is kind of the same reasons that I said there. A lot of times, we need to get that feedback fast because we're developers, we're not librarians. So we're very smart, but we don't always understand what you're doing. Another one of my favorites is that it allows us services where credentials are required for testing. It's hard to get those tested through the community because not everyone's going to have access. And when you develop as a plugin, you can let the user who has those credentials directly test and report back and develop it before you think about something in the community. And just for Kyle, I threw in there that it's a good way to avoid writing reports and using them as public reports to get JSON into the system, which we have a tendency to say we can do for everything. There are some issues with the process right now, or some things that we still watch out for. No one is going to make you write unit tests. Katrine and Jonathan are not going to come up to you and tell you that your plugin doesn't have unit tests. And that's kind of good for a developer, but it's really bad in the end. There's no community review, so when you write your plugin, you don't necessarily get the code review from other coders in the community who may see the things that the librarians won't see on the user side. When you write a plugin, the support depends upon the author. So if it doesn't come from your support company, if you're using a plugin that just developed out in the world, you rely on that person continuing to support it or learning it yourself. Currently, they're not translatable, and we don't have an official repository yet. We don't have a standard upgrade path. That's all stuff that we're going to talk about and work on, I think, at this Hackfest, or at least talk about. We have plans. If anyone is interested in those things, let us know. And then there's a few things where you need server-side access to set up the plugins. Tomas is going to talk about that a little bit later, but at least right now, the Coverflow plugin requires you adding some lines to Apache. Some of the other plugins require the same thing. And so while the user is able to install the plugin, they might not be able to use it out of the box. and we'd like to make it so that you can. Right now, too, plugins are not run under Plaque, which means that they can be slower, and that's something we're working on.
Yeah, especially when they are end user facing, like in the OPAC, you don't want to slow the OPAC down.
Yes. Unless your users like slow OPACs, and then it's okay. No one has that experience. Good. So the real advantage is, though, you can adapt the code quickly. We've had some cases where, integrating with a partner, with a vendor, and the interface changes. And what we have to do then is we have to, rewrite the code, submit it to the community, get it through the QA process, and get it in. And we do that as fast as we can, but if you compile, if you add on some of the other things that make it difficult to test things, that fix might not get in right away. With a plugin, you can adapt directly to the things that are going on. As I said before, the users give us the feedback. Librarians can install that. The real big reason that we like them, it's fast and it's fun. As developers, sometimes you don't get to see your things go out into the world right away. You're waiting to get them through QA, and with the plugin system, you get the rewards right away.
Okay. So we had this conversation many times in our developer meetings, and all these things wrap together into the same thing. We are not always comfortable with how our workflow goes, and finding a way to do things faster. It's really encouraging and motivating. As a developer, I've been spending lots of time on the REST API. And the current community workflow, while I love it and I support it, has some issues with this kind of development. This is a brief explanation of how it works for the API at least. So you have an idea, we want an endpoint for something, say getting marked records out of our catalog. Then you write a request for comments. You spend lots of time writing the RFC. It gets discussed, it gets voted, and then you start working on that. You submit all your work, and it waits for, say, a week. I'm very positive about that. And then someone needs that endpoint and realizes it's not complete, or it needs some more stuff. And then you get into a situation in which you spend lots of time. What you did is not good enough. And it will probably require more work because the code in which you based it changed a lot, and you need to do it again. So this takes lots of time. It's very discouraging. And it's basically pushing us back. So I had the chance to work on a couple endpoints that were needed for some partners, and as Nick said, it was a lot of fun. It allowed me to get feedback from the consumers very quickly. For example, you just put the plugin on a server, and they can try it, and they can tell you how bad it is, and you can just fix it and have a very fast feedback. The problems I try to highlight are this. When you write this endpoint, it might not be enough, so you need more endpoints. But if they are developed separately, all of them carry the same problem and the same delays. Speaking of the RFCs, an RFC is vote. If you need to change it, it's a big deal because we all agreed on a way of doing things, and maybe the code got pushed, and you're in need to change the already existing code that some people might be using. And as I said, the main problem is this doesn't end in a good result anyway. So the approach I came with is using the plugins for the API. I share the same feelings about the plugins and how they are out of the community workflow, but I think we have a case. The tools we picked for implementing the API allow us to inject new routes and new specifications for the endpoints, so we can validate them on runtime. This way, we can just add new endpoints using a plugin and have them validated, so it's fail-proof. If the plugin you are using is not good enough, the spec is broken, it just will skip it. It will just skip it. This is going to get in master soon, I think. The idea is that we can grab many endpoints together, make them available for the general use, have them tried. The librarians will find the issues with them. The consumers will find what's wrong with them. For example, if you want if you want to harvest all your records and you need some more information, you will notice you don't have enough information, and people will tell, okay, we need one more endpoint for this. We can just add that endpoint to this plugin and move on, you know? So once we get things working, we can really write a good RFC that suits the use cases. And when we have this, we are ready to push this code to community. So this is proposing a new workflow for some developments. And another good thing is some of these things we need might not suit the community. You know, you might have an endpoint that is totally not standard. So you can pick the ones that really make sense for the community, and yet you still have the plugin and it's functional and it's working for the consumer. And this is something we discussed with Kyle, and we got very happy when we realized this. The fact that we can inject routes into the API means we can actually run any plugin. We can convert plugins to run like this and then have them run in Plug without requiring any configuration on the server. So librarians will be free to use them without needing the IT people to touch the server. And of course, sysadmins will have less work maintaining different files for each instance. This is work in progress. It will be mastered soon. I already wrote a couple endpoints for retrieving bibliographic data and items. It's mostly a playground right now, but we have people interested on that work, so we are really getting feedback. And then there is the kitchen sink plugin that implements a CLI endpoint, and you can take a look.
I think Tomas just brought me up here with him so that he could mention that I'm going to push that bug enough, and so now I'm committed to pushing it.
Yeah. And there's lots of people staring at you. Right?
Questions?
The current implementation introduces what I call namespaces. So each plugin implements a new namespace, and there is a check for overwriting endpoints. So they will be skipped if they are overwriting existing endpoints. And it has unit tests. So The idea was to mention this and have anyone interested on either the plugin development or the REST API development come here at some point and join up these efforts.
That sounds really interesting. You're very interested in improving the REST API. Just one thing I thought about was maybe a little bit worrying is that you might have different sets of plugin using different kind of endpoints. Would that not theoretically mean we could have several REST APIs? Because they're locally very different. They're not one cohesive REST endpoints that's used. So it's difficult to talk to other libraries using other endpoints that they've implemented themselves.
Yeah.
How is this supposed to work?
I understand. Many things could happen. My idea behind this is that no Koha code base uses the plugins or the endpoints implemented by the plugins. So this is suitable for specific needs you have, or for playground work, for submitting to community, like this work I'm doing.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
I wanted to mention that the ILL module in Koha is a good candidate for plugin because we should really wrap all the backends into plugins.
So how do you decide after all of this that which APIs are going to be like part of the core product and which are not? That's kind of continuing on the last previous question.
I don't know. The idea is that all APIs go into community.
I would say too, having too many competing APIs that are available within Koha is probably a problem we'd like to start from. Having too many people developing too many things and having to decide among them is better than trying to give one that works without input. You know, back to the other question too, if one library develops, you know, special API roots and they're trying to talk to another library, as long as they're both in the Koha world at least, we can share these APIs. And we do think we kind of start to see that if we, you know, if it turns out that this one API, this one plugin is becoming used by everyone, then maybe that's the time in which we say, okay, this has a significant code base, this is worthy, this is in a state where it's ready for production, we should get it into the community now. But I think that sometimes you just have the problem that you start to develop something and then either Koha changes or the outside world changes in a way that it doesn't work. And with the RFC, you know, you have to reload, you have to move along. And this just allows for a little more adaptability. And I think that we see with a lot of APIs, there's still a lot of them out there that are growing. So integrating with them takes some time. And just one example I can give, Chris is raising his hand, but so there was integration done with Koha and Overdrive. And it worked really well, and it got into the community, and then Overdrive made a change on their end, which suddenly required a change in the Koha code, which meant that there was a lot of work that was done, but needed a rewrite. And if it had been done on a plugin, we could just make the change very quickly and get that out to the end users.
Yeah, I think probably an easy way to kind of sum it up is that these are ways of writing prototypes. And you've got a working prototype, and then you show that, and then it's much easier to decide we want that in the code or not. Working off RFCs is the same way that people used to procure software off an RFP process. It's really hard to visualize what something's going to be with written words. This is really disconcerting hearing myself in a delayed echo. So, but that's what I just want to say. So if you think of these as a nice way of prototyping, showing a proof of concept, and then putting it into the code base proper.
Yeah, I want to add something. This was all motivated by a day in which Jonathan told me, this doesn't work. I mean, this is not enough for implementing this very simple thing. And I kept thinking, well, what he's implying is that I need to spend a couple more months writing RFCs and writing new endpoints. And it will probably take like 3 or 4 months, and then something else will be missing. So I needed a workflow change because this was not going to work. So my idea is to deliver faster and have a better RFC with a more mature solution. That's the main thing. I don't want to develop endpoints as plugins per se. I just wanted a better way to wrap everything together and tell the developers, let's try it.
I want to confirm what you are saying, because on Wednesday we will do a talk. I'm talking about it. On Wednesday we will do a talk on integrating Koha and Coral, which is some software to manage electronic resources management. And we need some API into Koha to be able to link those two tools. And on the Coral part, everything is ready, and we are stuck by the API into Koha. That is still not included officially.